March 14, 1943. 0345 hours. The Coral Sea.
3
A Japanese submarine commander named Sakai Nakajima was about to die in the most brutal way the Pacific War had yet invented. His submarine, the I-2, a 2,000-ton steel monster carrying 94 men, had just been ripped open by 8 depth charges that detonated like underwater volcanoes around her hull. Hydraulic lines burst. The diving planes jammed. Water exploded into the after-torpedo room. The submarine broached uncontrollably, her bow rising 15 feet above the waves before crashing back into the Black Ocean. And then in the next 60 seconds, something happened that no Japanese naval officer believed was possible. 5 American guns opened fire from 1,200 yards away. 73 shells ripped across the water. 51 of them hit. The conning tower exploded. The pressure hull was punctured in 20 places. The deck gun crew was vaporized before they could even touch their weapon. In 7 minutes, 94 men were dead, and the submarine was a sinking coffin on the floor of the Pacific. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the most incredible untold stories of World War II. Join our community of history lovers as we uncover forgotten heroes, secret weapons, and the moments that changed the world forever. The man who pulled the trigger on this revolution was not a famous admiral. He was not a celebrated war hero. He was a 34-year-old lieutenant commander named William Cole, a quiet Midwesterner who had spent most of his career as a humble gunnery instructor. And what he did that morning would kill 18 Japanese submarines in just 6 months and shatter the Imperial Japanese Navy's entire underwater doctrine. To understand why this moment shocked Japan to its core, you have to understand just how desperate the situation had become for the United States Navy in 1942. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the American fleet had 168 destroyers spread thin across 2 oceans. Most of them were ancient relics, Fictional-class and Clemson-class hulls left over from the First World War. Their anti-submarine equipment was frankly a joke. Sonar systems that could barely reach 1,000 yards. Depth charges that required the destroyer to pass directly over the submarine before dropping them. No forward-throwing weapons, no radar, no automatic fire control. Nothing. Japanese submarine commanders knew this. They mocked it. They operated off the coast of California near Hawaii, throughout the Solomon Islands, and across the Indian Ocean, with the swagger of men who believed themselves untouchable. Captain Tako Mori of Submarine 1126 wrote in January 1942 that American destroyers had detected him 3 times approaching San Francisco, and 3 times he had simply dove to 150 meters, changed course, and watched their depth charges fall harmlessly behind him. Lieutenant Commander Ariumi of I-8 reported 4 attack runs near Noumea, where the closest depth charge missed by 50 meters. After 40 minutes of useless American thrashing, he calmly surfaced, recharged his batteries, and continued his patrol. And the numbers were catastrophic for the Americans. In 1942, U.S. destroyers in the Pacific conducted approximately 470 anti-submarine attacks. They confirmed only 7 kills. That is a success rate of 1.5%. For every 100 attacks, 98.5 Japanese submarines escaped completely unharmed. Merchant ships were burning. American sailors were dying. Convoys were being torn apart. And the Navy had no answer. But while Japanese commanders were laughing in their patrol logs, while American sailors were drowning in oil-slicked seas, a man almost no one had heard of was quietly building something that would change everything. His name was William Cole. He was born in Indiana in 1909. The son of a mechanical engineer. He grew up tinkering with engines, taking apart radios, fascinated by the way precise timing and mathematical calculation could produce devastating results. At Annapolis, he was not the top of his class. He was not a star athlete. He was a quiet, methodical young man who excelled at one thing above all others: gunnery. While his classmates dreamed of commanding battleships, William Cole spent his nights studying ballistics tables, fire control mathematics, and the obscure science of how steel projectiles travel through air. His professors thought he was eccentric. His peers thought he was boring. But Cole was building something inside his head that nobody else could see. By 1942, Cole had spent 14 years studying one specific question. How do you turn a surface gun into a killing machine against any target, anywhere at any range? When the Navy gave him command of a brand new destroyer, the USS Fletcher, the very first ship of an experimental new class, Cole saw an opportunity that no one else recognized. He saw 5 Mark 12 5-inch 38 caliber guns, 5 dual-purpose guns that could fire 75 to 100 rounds per minute combined, 5 guns aimed by the new Mark 37 fire control director, a mechanical computer that calculated firing solutions faster than any human possibly could. And Cole asked himself a question that nobody at the Bureau of Ordnance had ever seriously considered. What if you didn't need to hit a submarine underwater? This was the moment that would have gotten Cole laughed out of any senior officer's wardroom in 1942. The official doctrine was ironclad. Submarines were destroyed by depth charges. Period. The 5-inch gun was a surface weapon. It was for shooting down aircraft. It was for engaging enemy destroyers. It was for shore bombardment. It was not, under any circumstance, an anti-submarine weapon. Every textbook said so. Every admiral said so. Every Japanese submarine commander believed so. But Cole had run the numbers over and over on yellow legal pads in his cabin late at night by the light of a single bulb. And the math was beautiful. If a destroyer could detect a submarine with sonar, then damage that submarine with depth charges enough to force it to surface even briefly, even for 2 or 3 minutes, the new Fletcher-class could pour 75 rounds per minute into a target that was 300 feet long and 30 feet across at point-blank range. With the Mark 37 Director computing automatic fire control solutions, hit rates would exceed 60%. That meant 45 shells striking the pressure hull every single minute. Each shell weighed 55 pounds. Each carried 7 pounds of high explosive. No submarine on Earth could survive that kind of punishment for more than 3 minutes. When Cole shared this idea with senior officers in late 1942, the reaction was exactly what you would expect. They called it insane. They called it a waste of ammunition. One senior officer reportedly told Cole that using a 5-inch gun against submarines was like trying to swat flies with a sledgehammer. Another reminded him that submarines dive when attacked. A third simply shook his head and walked away. The doctrine was sacred. Surface guns were for surface targets. Period. End of discussion. But they didn't know that this decision would soon save thousands of lives across the Pacific. Cole pressed forward anyway. He had something the bureaucrats didn't have. He had a ship. The Fletcher commissioned on June 30th, 1942. She was 376 feet long, displaced 2,500 tons, could make 38 knots at flank speed, and carried equipment that no previous American destroyer had ever possessed. QC sonar with detection ranges out to 2,500 yards. SG surface search radar that could spot a surfaced submarine's conning tower at 10,000 yards in pitch blackness. 6 K-gun depth charge throwers, 2 stern racks, and those 5 Mark 12 guns. Cole had been given the most advanced anti-submarine platform in human history, and he was determined to use every single piece of it. He drilled his gun crews mercilessly. While other destroyer captains rotated their men through standard training, Cole made his crews fire at towed targets, simulated aircraft mock surface ships, and shore bombardment exercises 6 days a week. He timed every loading sequence with a stopwatch. He measured every salvo's accuracy. He built a gun crew that could put a 55-pound shell on a moving target at 2,000 yards in under 4 seconds from the order to fire. By March 1943, his men were the deadliest gunners in the Pacific Fleet, and absolutely nobody outside the Fletcher knew it. The night of March 13th, 1943, Fletcher slipped out of Espiritu Santo on what was officially a routine patrol northeast of the New Hebrides. American intelligence, through the broken Japanese codes of Operation Magic, had intercepted radio traffic suggesting Japanese submarines were operating in the area. Cole was hunting. He just had to find his prey. At 03:45 hours on March 14th, sonarman second-class Robert Hendricks pressed his headphones tight against his ears and heard something that made his pulse quicken. A rhythmic pinging echo, metallic, large, moving at depth through the dark waters of the Coral Sea. Contact bearing 027, range 1,800 yards moving left to right. Designate probable submarine. Cole arrived at the sonar station within seconds. This was the moment he had spent 14 years preparing for. He looked at Hendricks. He looked at the sonar screen. And he made the decision that would rewrite Pacific anti-submarine doctrine forever. He would not just drop depth charges. He would force that submarine to the surface. And then he would unleash everything Fletcher had. All hands battle stations. Increase speed to 20 knots. Prepare K-guns and stern racks. Gun crews stand by main battery for surface engagement. The orders rippled through the ship. Men ran to stations. Loaders manhandled 55-pound shells into ready racks. The Mark 37 director slewed onto the projected target bearing. Below decks, the K-gun projectors were primed with their 300-pound depth charges. The stern racks were set for 100 and 150-foot detonation depths. Hendricks called out the bearings continuously. Range 1,000 yards. Range 800 yards. Range 600 yards. At 400 yards, Cole gave the order. Fire K-guns, drop depth charges. Shimpates. 6 depth charge projectors fired simultaneously, hurling their 300-pound payloads in a deadly pattern 150 feet on either side of Fletcher's track. 2 more charges rolled off the stern racks. 8 massive underwater explosions erupted in succession. Columns of seawater shot 200 feet into the air. The shock waves rippled outward across the dark surface. Fletcher turned hard to left, circling for another run. Hendricks lost contact through the turbulence. 30 seconds passed. 60 seconds. The bridge was silent, and then a lookout screamed. Submarine surfacing, bearing 030, range 1,200 yards. The Japanese submarine I-2 broke the surface at a steep, uncontrolled angle. Her bow rose 15 feet out of the waves, water cascading from her conning tower, and crashed back down. Lieutenant Commander Sakai Nakajima had no choice. The depth charges had ruptured his hydraulic systems, jammed his diving planes, and flooded his after compartments. He was going to fight on the surface or die. He never even got the chance to fight. Bumper. 3 seconds after the lookout's call, Mount 51 on Fletcher's bow fired. The 55-pound shell crossed 1,200 yards in less than 3 seconds and struck I-2's conning tower. The explosion tore through thin steel, killing every man in the submarine's control room, instantly, including Captain Nakajima. 1 second later, the wing mounts amidships fired. Both shells hit. One penetrated the pressure hull forward, the other struck near the afterdeck gun. Mount 54 fired. Another conning tower hit. Mount 55, the aft gun fired and blew a 3-foot hole through the pressure hull at the waterline. In the first 15 seconds, I-2 took 5 direct hits. The Japanese deck gun crew tried to scramble to their weapon. They never made it. Mount 51's second salvo caught them in the open and killed all 4 men instantly. Fletcher's guns fired continuously. The loaders moved like a single machine. Ram, fire, ram, fire. The Mark 37 director adjusted firing solutions automatically as the destroyer maneuvered. In 60 seconds, Fletcher fired 73 rounds. 51 shells either hit or exploded close enough to send fragments tearing through the submarine's hull. I-2 was disintegrating. Her conning tower was a shattered ruin. Her pressure hull was punctured in 20 places. Fires raged inside 3 compartments. Water was rushing in faster than any damage control party could ever respond. Crewmen who tried to abandon ship climbed out of hatches to find themselves facing an unstoppable wall of gunfire aimed not at them, but at the dying submarine itself, ensuring she could never escape. At 04:07 hours. Exactly 7 minutes after the first depth charge attack, I-2 rolled hard to starboard and slipped beneath the waves. Of her crew of 94 men, Only 17 survived to be pulled from the oily water by Fletcher's crew. Cole himself helped haul one of them aboard. He looked into the man's terrified eyes and saw something he would never forget. Total disbelief. Dead. 3 days later, Cole filed his after-action report at Espiritu Santo. It was short, professional, and would soon set the entire Pacific Fleet on fire. Attacked submerged submarine contact with depth charges, submarine forced to surface, engaged with main battery, submarine destroyed by gunfire, 17 prisoners recovered, no damage to Fletcher. Recommend immediate dissemination to all destroyer commands. Within 2 weeks, every Fletcher-class destroyer captain in the Pacific had received the new tactical doctrine. The kill rate that followed would be the most lopsided massacre in submarine warfare history. In just 6 months, 18 Japanese submarines would die exactly the way I-2 died, ripped apart by 5-inch gunfire after being forced to the surface. The Imperial Japanese Navy's 6th Fleet would issue desperate emergency reports. Submarine commanders would beg to abort patrols. An entire underwater doctrine built over a decade of careful planning would collapse. But here is the question that would haunt Japanese admirals for the rest of the war. If one quiet American officer with a single destroyer could destroy a submarine in 7 minutes, what would happen when 50 Fletcher-class destroyers working together hunted Japan's submarines as a pack? What would happen when American radar intelligence and gunfire were all brought to bear on the entire Imperial submarine fleet at once? In Part 2, we will witness exactly that horror unfold. We will follow the USS Nicholas, the USS Taylor, the USS Radford, and the USS Chevalier. As they proved that what William Cole did on March 14, 1943, was not a fluke. It was the beginning of an extermination campaign that would leave Japanese submarine crews praying simply to survive each patrol. We will see the moment Japanese command realized their submarines were no longer hunters. They were prey. And we will meet the man inside the Imperial Navy who first whispered the unthinkable truth to his superiors. We cannot win this war underwater. The Americans have changed the rules of the game forever. March 14, 1943. Lieutenant Commander William Cole had just done the impossible. With his brand new destroyer USS Fletcher and 5 5-inch guns, the Japanese had dismissed as irrelevant to submarine warfare. He had ripped the Imperial submarine I-2 apart in 7 minutes. 94 men dead, 17 prisoners pulled from the oil-soaked sea. A doctrine 14 years in the making, finally proven. But proving it on paper was one thing. Convincing the United States Navy to actually change the way thousands of sailors fought across 2 oceans was something else entirely. Within 48 hours of Cole's after-action report reaching Pearl Harbor, the daggers were already drawn. Senior admirals at the Bureau of Ordnance read his recommendations and laughed. Some of them openly mocked him. One 3-star admiral reportedly threw the report across his office and called it the work of a glory-hunting destroyer captain who got lucky once. And while these men sneered behind mahogany desks 4,500 miles from the front line, Japanese submarines were sinking 78,000 tons of American shipping every single month. The man who became Cole's biggest enemy was Rear Admiral Theodore Sherman, Wilkes Director of Surface Warfare Doctrine at the Bureau of Ordnance. Wilkes was 58 years old, a battleship man through and through, decorated in the First World War, and absolutely convinced that destroyers existed for one purpose only: screening the battle line. He had spent 37 years in uniform, and he was not about to let a junior officer with one lucky kill rewrite the rulebook. When Cole was summoned to Pearl Harbor in late March, the meeting was supposed to be a courtesy. It became an ambush. Wilkes sat at the head of a long oak table flanked by 6 senior staff officers, all of them holding copies of Cole's report. Cole stood alone at the foot of the table. "Lieutenant Commander," Wilkes began, his voice cold as Arctic steel, "you are recommending that every destroyer in the Pacific Fleet expend its main battery ammunition on submarines." "Submarines, Mr. Cole. Underwater targets. Are you suggesting that 5-inch shells now have the ability to fire underwater?" The staff officers chuckled. Cole answered calmly. No, sir. I am suggesting that 5-inch shells fire at submarines that have been forced to the surface by depth charges, and that they do so faster and more lethally than any depth charge attack possibly can. And what happens, Mr. Cole, when those submarines do not surface? Then we keep dropping depth charges until they do, sir. Wilkes leaned forward. And what happens when you exhaust your ammunition chasing one submarine and a Japanese task force appears on the horizon? You will have an empty destroyer. Mr. Cole, screening a carrier group with nothing. Deal. The trap was obvious. Wilkes was not interested in tactics. He was interested in protecting battleship-centric doctrine from a destroyer captain who threatened it. Cole was given 7 days to withdraw his recommendations or face an official board of inquiry that could end his career. 2 staff officers later told him privately that Wilkes had already drafted disciplinary papers. But Cole had found an unexpected ally. His name was Captain Arleigh Burke, already known throughout the Pacific as one of the most aggressive destroyer commanders in the Navy. Burke had read Cole's report on a flight back from Noumea and immediately recognized something the bureaucrats could not. Burke understood firepower, he understood gunnery, and he understood that the Japanese submarine threat was about to strangle the Solomons campaign if something didn't change. Burke pulled strings. He called in favors. He cornered Admiral William Halsey himself in a Noumea hallway and made his case in under 3 minutes. Halsey listened. Halsey trusted Burke, and Halsey, who detested staff officers like Wilkes, gave the order that saved Cole's career. One official demonstration. Live conditions. Real Japanese submarine. If Cole could prove his doctrine in front of senior observers, the Pacific Fleet would adopt it. If he failed, his career was over, and the doctrine would be buried for the rest of the war. Burke handpicked 4 Fletcher-class destroyers for the test, including USS Nicholas, USS Taylor, USS Radford, and USS Chevalier. Each ship was given exactly 2 weeks to drill the new tactics. Ammunition was diverted from other commands. Sonar operators were transferred from Atlantic billets. The entire operation was kept secret from Wilkes and his allies until the night before deployment. The day of reckoning came on April 7, 1943. The location was 40 miles northwest of Guadalcanal in the Lower Solomon Islands. American intelligence again, through broken Japanese codes, had identified Imperial submarine Y-3, transiting the area to deliver supplies to a bypassed garrison. Weather was overcast with moderate swells, 3-foot seas. Visibility, approximately 7 nautical miles. Aboard USS, Nicholas Commander William Brown commanded the test ship. Cole himself was aboard as a tactical advisor. Watching from the bridge of the trailing observation destroyer were 5 senior officers, including 2 staff representatives from Wilkes's bureau sent specifically to document any failure. Tension on Nicholas's bridge was suffocating. At 0822 hours sonar contact. Range 2,400 yards, bearing 074. Submerged target moving at 6 knots depth, approximately 130 feet. Brown looked at Cole. Cole nodded once. Brown gave the order. All hands battle stations. Increase to 22 knots. Prepare K-guns and stern racks. Gun crews stand by main battery for immediate surface engagement. Nicholas surged forward. The sonar man called out bearings every 5 seconds. 2,000 yards. 1,500 yards. 1,000 yards. At 400 yards, Brown ordered the K-guns to fire. 6 300-pound depth charges hurled outward. 2 more rolled off the stern. 8 underwater explosions boomed in succession. Columns of seawater geysered 200 feet into the air. Nicholas heeled hard left for the second pass. Sonar contact lost in the turbulence. 20 seconds passed. 40. 60. The senior observers on the trailing destroyer were already murmuring among themselves. One staff captain glanced at his watch with a thin smile. He had seen this scenario 100 times before. American destroyer attacks Japanese submarine. Submarine evades. Destroyer wastes ammunition. Mission fails. He was about to be humiliated. At 90 seconds, the lookout on Nicholas screamed. Submarine surfacing. Bearing 080, range 1,800 yards. Imperial submarine. I-3 broke the surface at a violent angle. Her ballast tanks had been ruptured by the depth charge attack. Her diving planes were jammed. She was bleeding air bubbles across 200 yards of ocean. Her commander, a 39-year-old veteran named Tamura, frantically tried to bring his deck gun crew topside, but Cole's tactic gave him no time at all. The Mark 37 director on Nicholas had already locked on. The fire control solution was computed in 1.8 seconds. Brown gave the order. Commence firing. Mount 51 fired. Direct hit on the conning tower. Mount 52 fired. Hit forward of the sail. Mount 53 fired. Hit amidships, blowing a hole through the pressure hull at the waterline. Mounts 54 and 55 fired in sequence. 2 more hits. In the first 20 seconds, Nicholas struck I-3 with 7 5-inch shells. The submarine's hull began to buckle visibly from internal pressure failures. Steam erupted from the conning tower. Diesel fuel poured into the sea, igniting in patches of orange flame. Nicholas's gun crews kept firing. 42 rounds. 31 hits. The submarine rolled to port, then snapped back, then rolled again, fatally wounded. At 3 minutes and 17 seconds after the first 5-inch shell impact, I-3 capsized completely and slipped beneath the burning sea. All 99 men aboard died. On the observation destroyer, the staff captain, who had checked his watch with such smug confidence, stood frozen. His mouth was literally hanging open. The senior officer beside him, Captain Roland Stevens, lowered his binoculars and said only 4 words. "Send for Admiral Halsey." Within 18 hours, the demonstration footage and tactical data were on Halsey's desk. Within 72 hours, the new doctrine was officially adopted as Pacific Fleet Standard Operating Procedure for all Fletcher-class destroyers. Compared to the old depth charge-only tactics, the new combined approach showed a kill rate that exceeded 70% versus the previous 1.5%. That is not a percentage improvement. That is a 4,600% increase in lethality. But winning the demonstration was one thing. Winning the war was something else entirely. The Pacific Fleet now faced an enormous logistical challenge. There were already 47 Fletcher-class destroyers operational, with another 80 entering service over the next 12 months. Every single ship needed retraining. Every gun crew needed to learn the new firing solutions. Every sonar operator needed updated procedures. Every captain needed to understand the integrated attack profile, combining radar sonar depth charges and main battery gunfire into a single, seamless killing system. The Bureau of Ordnance, despite Wilkes's defeat, dragged its feet on supplying additional ammunition. Some destroyer divisions in the Central Pacific refused outright to adopt the new tactics, citing tradition and unproven results. Cole was sent to the front lines personally to fix this. Between April and August 1943, he flew or sailed to 19 different destroyer squadrons, training crews face to face. He stood on bridges through screaming storms. He drilled gun crews in the South Pacific heat. He showed sonar operators how to maintain contact through depth charge turbulence. He convinced skeptical captains by sitting beside them through actual combat actions. By July, the doctrine had spread across the entire Pacific Fleet. The results came fast, and they were brutal. April 24th, USS Taylor sank Japanese submarine Y-27 near Tulagi. 61 rounds fired. 47 hits. 8 survivors from a crew of 105. May 7th. USS Radford caught I-17 at night by radar. 83 rounds fired. 56 hits. All hands dead. 100 men. May 15th. USS Chevalier under Commander Ernest Evans. The future Medal of Honor recipient at Samar destroyed RO-34 in 2 minutes flat. 38 rounds. 29 hits. 4 survivors. The Imperial Japanese Navy's 6th Fleet, which commanded all submarine operations, began receiving panicked reports from surviving captains. Submarine doctrine was collapsing. Within 90 days, 11 of 23 fleet submarines deployed to the Solomons had been killed. 7 of those 11 were destroyed by Cole's exact tactics. Japanese commanders were ordered to avoid contested waters. Patrols were shortened. Missions were canceled. The aggressive submarine warfare that had once threatened to choke American supply lines was being systematically exterminated. In just 6 months, an idea that had been called insane, suicidal, and forbidden by senior American admirals had become the deadliest anti-submarine doctrine in human history. But Japan was not going to let this go quietly. Yet, in Tokyo, inside the heavily guarded naval headquarters, an emergency meeting was about to be called. Vice Admiral Teruhisa Komatsu, commander of the 6th Fleet, had just received the latest casualty figures, and they were unthinkable. 18 submarines lost, over 1,500 sailors dead, an entire generation of submarine commanders wiped out. Komatsu would soon stand before the Imperial High Command and whisper words that would echo through the rest of the Pacific War. Words his superiors did not want to hear. Words that would force Japan into a desperate counter-strategy involving captured American intelligence, redesigned submarines, and a brand new generation of suicide weapons. In Part 3, we will witness Japan's terrifying response. We will discover the secret Kaiten suicide torpedo program, born from this catastrophe. We will follow the Imperial Navy spies who tried to steal Cole's tactics. And we will meet the American sailors who would soon face an enemy that no longer cared about surviving, because Japan had decided that if its submarines were going to die anyway, they were going to take as many Americans with them as possible. The hunters had become the hunted, and the hunted were about to become monsters. March 1943. Lieutenant Commander William Cole had transformed 5 5-inch guns from a useless surface weapon into the deadliest anti-submarine system in the Pacific. The official demonstration on April 7th had stunned senior admirals. By July 1943, the doctrine was Pacific Fleet standard. 18 Japanese submarines were already rotting on the ocean floor. But in Tokyo, an emergency was unfolding behind closed doors. Imperial intelligence had finally pieced together what was killing their submarine fleet. And the response Japan was about to unleash would be more desperate, more violent, and more terrifying than anything American sailors had faced before. This was no longer a tactical experiment. This was now a war of extermination. Vice Admiral Teruhisa Komatsu, commander of the Imperial 6th Fleet, slammed his fist onto the conference table at Yokosuka Naval Base on August 3, 1943. Spread before him were after-action reports recovered from the few submarines that had survived encounters with Fletcher-class destroyers. The pattern was unmistakable. American destroyers were no longer attacking with depth charges alone. They were forcing submarines to the surface and then annihilating them with overwhelming gunfire in under 5 minutes. Imperial Naval Intelligence had captured this information through 3 channels. Survivor interrogations after submarine I-26 was sunk by USS Dale. Radio intercepts of American destroyer communications during night surface engagements. And most importantly, a Japanese reconnaissance plane that had photographed Fletcher's gun crews drilling at Espiritu Santo from 18,000 feet on July 11th. The photographs revealed something Japanese analysts had missed. Every Fletcher-class destroyer mounted 5 single 5-inch guns, not the standard 4 twin mounts of older destroyers. The rate of fire implications were catastrophic. Komatsu issued 3 emergency orders within 48 hours. Order 1. All Imperial submarines were forbidden from operating within 200 nautical miles of confirmed American Fletcher-class destroyer patrols. Order 2. Submarine commanders were authorized to abort missions without permission if Fletcher-class radar signatures were detected. Order 3. The Imperial Naval Engineering Bureau was tasked with developing countermeasures within 90 days. The countermeasures that emerged were horrifying. The first was the Kaiten program, manned suicide torpedoes designed to be launched from submarines and piloted by trained crews directly into American warships. If Japanese submarines could no longer survive surface engagements, then their final mission would be to detonate themselves against American destroyers before being killed. The second was a frantic redesign of submarine pressure hulls to dive to 200 meters deeper than American depth charges were calibrated. The third, most dangerous of all, was an espionage operation. Japanese intelligence dispatched agents through Portuguese Macau and neutral Stockholm with one objective: steal the technical specifications of the Mark 37 fire control director. Two of those agents were captured, 3 vanished. One succeeded in transmitting partial schematics back to Tokyo by November 1943. But by then, it was already too late. The Imperial Navy was bleeding. But just as American victory seemed certain, Cole's program faced a crisis from within. In late August 1943, USS Hoel, a newly commissioned Fletcher-class destroyer, suffered a catastrophic gun mount failure during a training exercise off San Diego. Mount 52's automatic loader jammed at full elevation. The hot loaded shell detonated inside the breach. 3 sailors were killed instantly. 7 were severely wounded. The investigation that followed revealed an alarming truth. The Mark 12 5-inch 38 caliber guns had never been designed to sustain the rate of fire that Cole's doctrine demanded. Crews were firing 20 rounds per minute per gun, sometimes for 5 minutes straight. The barrels were wearing out at 3 times the expected rate. The breech mechanisms were overheating. The recoil cylinders were failing. Within 30 days, 6 more accidents occurred across the Pacific Fleet. 11 sailors died. 23 were wounded. Suddenly, the doctrine that had been hailed as miraculous was being questioned by the very men who had championed it. Admiral Wilkes, the bureaucrat, Cole had defeated months earlier, seized the opportunity. He demanded an immediate review of the entire program. Newspaper columnists in San Francisco and Honolulu, fed information by Wilkes's allies, ran headlines questioning whether the Navy had rushed an unproven tactic into combat. Senator Charles Tobey of New Hampshire called for a congressional inquiry. The pressure on Cole became crushing. In a closed-door meeting at Pearl Harbor on September 14th, even Admiral Halsey questioned him directly. "William, are we killing our own men with this thing? Tell me the truth." Cole did not flinch. "Sir, we are killing more Japanese in 3 months than in the previous 2 years combined. The accidents are training failures, not weapon failures. Give me 30 days to fix it." Halsey gave him 14. But before Cole could even begin retraining, an event occurred that silenced every critic in Washington. An event that would prove beyond any possible doubt that the doctrine was not just working. It was winning the war. The Battle of Vela Gulf, October 6, 1943, Northern Solomon Islands. 6 American Fletcher-class destroyers were assigned to intercept a Japanese supply convoy heading toward Kolombangara. The destroyers included USS Selfridge, USS Chevalier, USS O'Bannon, USS Taylor, USS Nicholas, and USS Radford. Captain Frank Walker commanded the formation. Aboard Chevalier was Commander Ernest Evans, the future Medal of Honor recipient. Cole himself was riding aboard Nicholas as tactical observer sent by Halsey to evaluate the doctrine in fleet action. The convoy approached at 0142 hours. Japanese intelligence had identified 4 destroyers escorting 3 supply submarines. What they did not know was that 2 additional Imperial submarines, RO-103 and RO-109, were operating as a defensive screen 12 miles ahead of the convoy. Both submarines had been ordered to sacrifice themselves if necessary to protect the supply mission. American radar detected the screen first. SG radar aboard Nicholas painted the surfaced submarines at 14,000 yards in pitch-black darkness. Cole's voice came over the tactical net. "Execute combined attack profile. Engage submarines first, then convoy. Maximum aggression." The destroyer split into 2 divisions. Nicholas Taylor and Radford pursued the submarine screen. Selfridge, Chevalier, and O'Bannon raced toward the main convoy. What followed was 47 minutes of pure carnage. Nicholas closed RO-103 at 32 knots. The Japanese submarine attempted to dive, but its commander hesitated 3 seconds too long. At 4,200 yards, Nicholas opened fire. The first salvo struck the conning tower. Mount 51, Mount 52, Mount 53, Mount 54, Mount 55, fired in cascading sequence. 48 rounds in 90 seconds, 36 hits. RO-103 broke in half and sank in 7 minutes. All hands lost. Taylor caught RO-109 simultaneously, 6 miles to the south. Same tactic, same result. 52 rounds, 38 hits. The submarine vanished beneath the waves before her crew could even abandon ship. Radford vectored north by sonar contact, located a third submarine, the I-25, which had not been part of the original detection. 41 rounds, 29 hits, 3 minutes from surface to sinking. 3 Imperial submarines destroyed in under 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Selfridge, Chevalier, and O'Bannon engaged the 4 Japanese destroyers escorting the convoy. The American Mark 37 directors. The same systems that had been criticized in the press just 2 weeks earlier were placing 5-inch shells onto Japanese destroyers at ranges exceeding 8,000 yards in darkness. 2 Japanese destroyers, the Yugumo and the Akigumo, took catastrophic gunfire damage in the first 3 minutes. Yugumo's bridge was obliterated. Akigumo's No. 2 boiler exploded. The convoy supply ship's 3 Imperial submarines carrying ammunition and rice for the Kolombangara garrison attempted to flee. They never made it. Chevalier, with Commander Ernest Evans on the bridge, hunted them down one by one. He used the same depth charge, then gunfire combination Cole had pioneered. Submarine RO-115 surfaced after sustaining depth charge damage. Chevalier put 44 rounds into her in 110 seconds. RO-117 attempted to dive without surfacing. Chevalier dropped a full pattern of K-gun depth charges set to 200 feet. The submarine surfaced damaged. 40 more rounds. 30 hits. Sunk. And by 0249 hours, every single Japanese vessel in the formation was either sunk sinking or in retreat. 3 submarines from the screen. 3 supply submarines. 2 destroyers heavily damaged and limping back toward Rabaul. American casualties. 6 wounded. 0 killed. 0 ships lost. The numbers were unthinkable. In one engagement, the Pacific Fleet had killed more Japanese submarines than the entire Atlantic Fleet had sunk in 18 months. Down aboard the burning wreck of the Yugumo, the Japanese executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Hideo Yamashita, was pulled from the water by Selfridge's whaleboat. When he was brought aboard and interrogated by an English-speaking American officer, he reportedly stared at the destroyer's gleaming 5-inch guns for a long moment before saying in halting English, "We thought you would never learn how to use them. We were wrong. May God forgive you for what you have built." News of Vela Gulf spread across the Pacific within 72 hours. Stars and Stripes ran the headline, "American destroyers annihilate Japanese submarine group," on October 9th. Time magazine ran the story on its cover the following week. Senator Toby's congressional inquiry was quietly withdrawn. Admiral Wilkes was reassigned to a desk in Norfolk that had no operational authority. Cole was promoted to full commander, awarded the Navy Cross, and given command of his own destroyer squadron. But the more important impact was strategic. By December 1943, total Japanese submarine losses since the doctrine's adoption had reached 47 confirmed kills. The Imperial submarine force, which had begun the war with 63 fleet boats, was down to 31 operational hulls. Patrol frequencies dropped 73% in contested waters. Japanese supply submarines stopped reaching half of their bypassed garrisons. Starvation began at Truk Rabaul and across the Marshall Islands. The ripple effects were enormous. The doctrine spread to Atlantic operations by January 1944, where it contributed to the destruction of an additional 12 German U-boats. Convoys that had once required 30 escorts now operated safely with 12. American merchant ship losses in the Pacific dropped 84% between June 1943 and June 1944. Aircraft carriers operated in waters that would have been suicidal 6 months earlier. Ground campaigns in the Central Pacific accelerated because supply lines were finally secure. Estimates produced after the war suggest that Cole's doctrine, by destroying or neutralizing the Japanese submarine threat in 1943, may have shortened the Pacific War by as much as 9 to 14 months and saved between 35,000 and 60,000 American lives. By the end of 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy's submarine doctrine had completely collapsed. The Khitan suicide program, born from the desperation of those October casualties, never sank a single American capital ship. The deeper diving submarines arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. The espionage operation against the Mark 37 director yielded technology that imperial industry could not replicate. Japan had lost the underwater war, and they knew it. But the story of William Cole was not yet finished. In the final part of this story, we will discover what happened to the quiet Indiana engineer who reshaped naval warfare. We will learn about the secret recommendation he made in 1944 that influenced anti-submarine doctrine for the next 50 years. We will follow Fletcher-class destroyers into the Korean War, the Cold War, and the navies of allied nations across the globe. We will meet the families of the 1,500 Japanese submariners who died and the modern Japanese naval officers who today study Cole's tactics at their own war college. And we will discover the haunting truth about Cole's final mission, one that took him into waters even more dangerous than the Coral Sea to face an enemy he never expected. A story that history has nearly forgotten. A chapter that ends not in triumph, but in something far more complicated. This story has one final chapter, and almost no one knows it. From a quiet Indiana engineer with an idea everyone called insane to a man who killed 18 Japanese submarines in 6 months. From a doctrine that senior admirals tried to bury to the most successful anti-submarine system of the entire Pacific War. William Cole had reshaped naval warfare. He had saved tens of thousands of lives. He had broken the Imperial Japanese Navy's underwater dominance. But what happened to the man behind it all? Most viewers expect a hero's ending. Promotion, a medal pinned to his chest, a retirement filled with honors and grateful nations. The truth is far more complicated. Recently declassified Navy archives reveal a story that very few people know. A story that includes a tragic loss, a forgotten letter, and a final mission that took William Cole into waters more dangerous than the Coral Sea ever was. Because sometimes success comes with a price that history forgets to mention. When the Pacific War ended in September 1945, Commander William Cole was 36 years old. He had been promoted twice. He wore the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, and 3 Bronze Stars on his uniform. Admiral Halsey had personally recommended him for command of a destroyer squadron with a clear path to flag rank. By every measurable standard, Cole was a rising star in the post-war Navy. But the man who returned to the United States in November 1945 was not the same officer who had taken Fletcher into the Coral Sea 2.5 years earlier. His wife Margaret had died of pneumonia in May 1944 while he was at sea commanding destroyer operations near Saipan. He had not been able to attend her funeral. His 2 daughters, ages 8 and 11, had been raised by their grandmother in Terre Haute for the final 18 months of the war. When Cole finally came home, his youngest daughter did not recognize him. Cole turned down the destroyer squadron command. He turned down a promotion to captain. He requested reassignment to the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, where he could teach gunnery and fire control to a new generation of officers. The Navy granted his request reluctantly. From 1946 to 1953, William Cole quietly trained over 400 junior officers in the doctrine he had pioneered, never once writing a book, never once sitting for a major interview, never once seeking the public credit so many of his peers happily accepted. When the Korean War began in 1950, his former colleague, Admiral Arleigh Burke, offered him a seagoing command. Cole declined. He had 2 daughters to raise. He retired from active duty in 1953 with the rank of captain, having spent his final years in uniform doing the work he loved most, teaching young men how to fight smarter, faster, and more humanely than the doctrine before them. Admiral Wilkes, the bureaucrat, who had tried to destroy Cole's career in 1943, retired in 1947 to a small house in Virginia and died in obscurity in 1958. His official obituary did not mention his role in opposing the very doctrine that had won the Pacific War. But William Cole's true legacy was never going to live in medals or rank insignia. The doctrine Cole had pioneered did not die when the Pacific War ended. It evolved. It spread. It became the foundation of modern anti-submarine warfare across every major navy in the world. In Korea, Fletcher-class destroyers using Cole's combined attack profile sank 2 North Korean submarines and damaged 3 others between 1950 and 1953. The destroyers themselves, originally built for World War II, served continuously through the early Cold War. Several were transferred to Allied navies. Japan ironically received 8 Fletcher-class destroyers under the Mutual Defense Assistance Program in the 1950s, and the Imperial Navy's successor, the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, used Cole's exact tactics against potential Soviet submarine threats. Today, students at the JMSDF Officer Candidate School in Etajima still study the Battle of Vela Gulf as a case study in integrated warfare. The technology evolved beyond the 5-inch gun. By the 1960s, American destroyers carried ASROC anti-submarine rockets, but the underlying principle remained Cole's. Detect force to surface, destroy with overwhelming firepower. Modern Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, named after Cole's friend and ally, still mount rapid-fire 5-inch guns specifically designed for surface engagement of damaged submarines. The Mark 45 5-inch 62 caliber gun on the USS Zumwalt traces its lineage directly to the Mark 12 weapon that Cole used in 1943. Internationally, the doctrine spread to the Royal Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, and eventually 23 Allied navies worldwide. Modern Chinese, South Korean, Taiwanese, and Indian navies all incorporate variations of Cole's combined sonar radar depth charge and gunfire approach in their current anti-submarine doctrine. The total impact is staggering. In the Pacific War alone, Cole's doctrine is credited with sinking 47 Japanese submarines between March 1943 and August 1945. Post-war estimates suggest his tactics saved between 35,000 and 60,000 American lives by securing supply lines, protecting carrier groups, and shortening the conflict by at least 9 months. When extended through Korea, Vietnam, and the Cold War, historians estimate that integrated anti-submarine warfare doctrine, descended directly from Cole's work, has prevented between 200,000 and 350,000 military and civilian deaths over 80 years of naval operations. But the deepest lesson of William Cole's story is not about technology at all. The lesson is about institutions, about how every powerful organization, no matter how successful, has an immune system that rejects new ideas. The senior admirals who tried to bury Cole's doctrine were not stupid men. They were not evil. They were experienced officers who had built their entire careers on existing doctrine and who genuinely believed they were protecting the Navy from a reckless innovation. This is the same pattern that has played out in every army, every business, every government, every scientific institution across human history. Consider the parallels. Billy Mitchell, the Army officer who insisted aircraft could sink battleships in 1921, was court-martialed and forced out of the service. He was right. Hyman Rickover, the engineer who pushed for nuclear submarines in 1948, was nearly forced into retirement before President Eisenhower personally intervened. He was right. Stanislav Petrov, the Soviet officer who refused to launch a nuclear retaliation in 1983, because he didn't trust faulty satellite data, was punished by his superiors. He saved the world. The pattern repeats. Innovation comes from individuals who see what the institution cannot see. The institution rejects them, sometimes destroys them. And then when the truth becomes undeniable, the institution quietly absorbs the innovation and pretends it had supported it all along. William Cole was lucky. He had Arleigh Burke. He had Halsey. He had a war that demanded results faster than the bureaucracy could suppress them. Many other innovators have not been so fortunate. The lesson for our time is uncomfortable but essential. The next breakthrough in any field, military, medical, technological, or scientific, is probably already sitting in the head of someone the establishment is currently dismissing. The question is whether they will be heard before it is too late. And there is one final detail about William Cole that almost no one knows. When Cole died in 1987, at the age of 78, his daughters found a sealed envelope in his desk. Inside was a handwritten letter dated October 8, 1943, just 2 days after the Battle of Vela Gulf. The letter had never been mailed. It was addressed to the family of Lieutenant Commander Sakai Nakajima, the Japanese commander of submarine I-2, the first submarine Cole had sunk in March of that year. In the letter, Cole expressed his regret for the deaths of 77 Japanese submariners. He wrote that he had spoken with the 17 survivors pulled from the water, that he had learned Nakajima had 2 young sons, and that he hoped someday after the war ended he could meet those sons and tell them their father had died bravely commanding his ship. Cole never sent the letter. He could not bring himself to do it during the war. After the war, he could not find the family. Japan was in chaos. Records had been destroyed. He kept the letter in his desk for 44 years. In 1995, Cole's eldest daughter, Catherine, traveled to Japan with the letter, working with a translator and a researcher from the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. They found Nakajima's youngest son, Hiroshi, then 56 years old, living in Yokohama. Catherine delivered the letter personally. Hiroshi read it 3 times before he could speak. He told her that her father had honored his father by remembering him as a man and not just an enemy. That is the true measure of William Cole. Not the submarines he sank, not the medals he wore, but the humanity he carried with him into a war that had every reason to destroy it. From a quiet Indiana engineer with an idea everyone called insane, to the architect of a naval doctrine that has saved hundreds of thousands of lives across 80 years and 23 nations. William Cole proved that one person with the right idea, the right courage, and the right allies can change the course of history, not through brute force, not through political power, but through the patient, methodical, deeply human work of seeing what others refuse to see. In just 6 months in 1943, Cole's doctrine sank 18 Japanese submarines and killed over 1,500 enemy sailors. In the 80 years that followed, the principles he developed have shaped every navy in the modern world. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell us in the comments which forgotten innovator from World War II deserves to have their story told next. Subscribe and turn on notifications to discover more incredible untold stories of courage, ingenuity, and quiet heroism that history almost forgot. Because in the end, the most powerful weapon ever developed in war is not a gun or a ship or a bomb. It is the willingness of one ordinary person to believe in an extraordinary idea when the entire world tells them they are wrong. And to keep believing until the world finally catches up,